Hello, friends, family, and keepers of the faith, to blog 46. And the most important thing, it's the first blog after the new year. So this is dated 8th of January 2023. And first of all, I just want to sort of thank everybody that watched my blog last week and left a comment and wished me Happy New Year. You're all my friends. I feel very close to you, even though I can't see your faces. And it's sort of helped me get a new start to this year. I look out the window, and although it's not bright, it's not too bad weather-wise. I don't feel too cold, and I'm looking forward to spring coming around. I know we shouldn't really do things like that because we're wishing time away. We're wishing our lives away to get to the next part, the bit that we feel will be more comfortable for us. I'm going to try to do less of that and experience the day as you should experience a day, not wishing it away. So I'm hoping that that's going to be sort of a good point for my blog. Now, I usually start off with the news, and to be quite honest, it's been such a busy week for me, and a little bit distressing as well, because my eyesight is still blurring up, and I haven't been able to do everything that I would like to do, but that hasn't made it any less busy. So when it comes to the news, I've always said that I would keep it simple, with very few opinions of me. It's just to date stamp the show. But we know that the war continues in Ukraine. And I'll continue to keep mentioning the war because, to be quite honest, it's a travesty. We shouldn't be having it. And I do know that the news broadcasts now always have it in the news programs, but on the back foot. They talk more about what's going on closer to home, and then bring in stories of travesty that's going on at the moment. So we know that the war continues. At the moment, I believe Russians are using tactics in advance of the weather. So they're entering a cold snap because it's winter. So they're targeting anything to do with power, electricity, gas, to basically freeze the people out. So we know those tactics will continue. During Christmas, there was no planned truce calls. I just hope every week there is a planned call that's going to be made that will get these people round the table to end this travesty. And when it comes to local news, just because it's just past New Year, there hasn't really been anything that's gripped my fancy. The newspapers, which I get from my mother every day, just for the crossword, all I've noticed every day I've picked up a newspaper is about Prince Harry. So just to give you an example, here's one of the newspapers this week. Harry did coke and weed. I'll just explain what this news is. Prince Harry has been sort of in the news on and off ever since he married Meghan. But when that happened, there were all high hopes that it would be a great success, that we've got another prince in a happy marriage. And for the most part, for Harry, it is. But the peer pressure and the media pressure that befell them in the first year was so awful for them that they made a decision to move away from being part of the royal family. Didn't totally lose his title, but decided to move totally away to America. And from that point on, there's been speculation of what this pressure was. Was it all media? And so over the last couple of years, Harry has done some interviews, documentaries, and there have been snippets every single time that there was unrest between him and his brother, and the royal family, totally. And even when the Queen died, Harry was the last person, I believe, to turn up. You know, possibly because, you know, you've got to get planes, or he wasn't in the country, or whatever. But whichever way you look at it, I believe the Queen was very devastated that things weren't as close as she'd like them to be between the rest of the royal family. But she had to do what she had to do, and that was take away certain privileges. There's been speculation in regards to whether the taxpayers now pay bodyguards for Prince Harry whenever he's in the country, and all sorts of stuff. So anyway, getting back to this year, he's written an autobiography. It came out this week, and the newspapers are all over it. And each day there has been snippets from the book. So in that particular instance there's an admittance that he did coke and weed. I haven't read any of these stories. I have no opinion of it. I do remember back in the day when he was starting to go into the army that he was partying an awful lot. It's no revelation to me, therefore, that I've seen a royal family person with a spliff in his gob, smoking some weed. Cocaine has now become not the designer drug. It's now pretty easy drug, as I've been told, to get. So that doesn't surprise me either. I think the things that would surprise me was if he was doing heroin, you know, injecting himself and all of this sort of stuff. So, to be quite honest, that's the news out the way. The really, you know, I will start doing my news like I normally do, but that's the nonsense of the news at the moment. And after I do the news, I generally settle back now and start talking about you guys and doing some shout outs. Now, it's been a very complicated couple of weeks with Christmas and New Year for me turning up at the weekend. So sometimes I miss things. So I've gone back and looked to see if I've missed any questions, and I apologise if I had. I tried yesterday to answer all of the comments that came through. Even ones that I answer in my blog, I give a comment to at the end of the week. And so here are the shout outs, the new shout outs for 2023. So in no particular order, they are Martroid, Wee Bob Art, Rocket Bunny, Down the Rabbit Hole, LFC Gamer, 20th Century Gaming, Mainmeister, Colin Jones, Jambon, Milfy Swinbuckle, OT Hello, Study Buddy, Denny, Garrett Spencer, Lord Evil, and Robert's Retro Gaming. Now, hopefully I haven't missed anybody there. I'm just going to double check. No, I think that's everybody. And every single one of those has left a comment. Some have left questions. Everyone wishing me and my mother a happy new year. And I thank you for that, because those sort of things make me feel that at some point in the week you've given a thought to watch the blog, or I came into your mind for whatever reason, you had a reaction to something I said. All of those sort of things are things that sort of like make me feel like I'm needed. Do you know what I mean? And everybody should have the feeling that they're wanted in their lives, you know? We've always need that an aspect of us, you know, that we're loved, that we're wanted, that we're needed, and they're just things, quality of life things that we want. So every single one of you there, thank you very much. And usually I just do now just some comments and some questions and try to answer all of these. And I have to say right now, if I do miss a question this week, I do apologize, but there was a cut-off period last night that I had to impose on myself because I'm trying to get more quality of sleep. So I tried to get everything done, started a little bit earlier and get everything done before 8 o'clock last night. And then give myself some time to relax, not looking up news articles and things to speak about and writing some notes down and all of that sort of stuff. So I do apologise for that. So the first one I've got here is Jambon, and he, as I've said, he says hello and thanks for the New Year blog and so forth. And he's asked a question. So he's got, he said he'd forgotten what to say and a question for the week, but if he doesn't mind, he'd like to know, what are some of your favourite household gadgets or appliances that you have that not everyone else does and that you would recommend? And his would be a rice cooker and a little plug hole blockers that stop the drains getting blocked up. It's a very, very good question, and ever since my father has left, I do quite a bit of the stuff that goes around the house. I mean, where my mother sits, and in the front room it's immaculately clean. I hoover it and steam clean and all sorts of stuff. I have a lack of space in my room, so my room's the sort of like the worst in the whole of the house. But don't really think too much really about household gadgets. I know just before Christmas that I had to get out a gadget that I hadn't used in a long time, which is a Dremel. Now, if you don't know what a Dremel is, it's sort of like a hand-based drill. It's almost like so rather than a drill being something that you drill into a wall with two hands and two hand grips, this holds in your hand and you put little spindles or sanding stones or whatever it is at the end, and you can do detailed work. And the reason I had to do that was I had to sharpen my the kitchen blades. They were getting very dull, and I found an old whetstone of my father's, but it's in a wooden block, but it was getting very, very poor, and I found some oil and tried to sharpen the blades, but they weren't getting very far. And I spoke to my uncle because at the same time as I'm thinking about cutlery, I was thinking about the garden that would need the mower. The mower needs would be needed in the spring, and that's got a cutting blade, a very, very big cutting blade at the bottom, a metal one. And he used to come round every couple of years and use a grinding stone, an actual grinder that you'd use for cutting concrete. And he would come along, take the blade off, put it in a vise, and pretty much grind that blade to sharpness again. So that came up with the idea of the Dremel. So I got the Dremel, and I bought in the sales some more Dremel ends, because you can do all sorts of things with a Dremel. You can polish, you can cut like a detail cut saw, all sorts of stuff with a Dremel. And I started to sharpen the blades, and it worked very well. I thought I would really, really cock it all up. Do you know what I mean? And the weird thing about it all was I didn't see, on Amazon at least, many whetstones like my father had in the garage. I'm going to look at Screwfix, I think, and a few other companies, and see whether you can still buy a good whetstone. I saw lots of sharpeners, but they all look tin pot. The type of thing where you got a plastic and a sharpened tip at the top where you put the blades through at a certain angle and slide them through and just keep doing that. They all look tin pot. They all look like they'd fall to bits. So, and I do know that if you buy some really nice blades these days, I'm talking ones over £100, they come with a self-sharpening base that you put them into. But no, our blades are perfectly good, so I'm glad I got that out of the way. So I don't really have a good answer for you, Jambon, but blade sharpening is probably the only thing that really comes to my mind at the moment, and I hope that's a good answer for you. And Happy New Year to you. And Denny, so Denny, obviously, great friend of mine. He looks at my blog, he writes his own notes, has his own opinion of things. Just to give you some examples, he talked about the pig heart transplant from last week, saying how wonderful it is about medical procedures when it comes to the Winter Olympics and the Commonwealth, because of the close proximity of where those were held this year. He thought it wasn't quite as busy as this year as other times. He thought the Eurovision is a sort of a joke. The Queen's death definitely affected him this year, and it goes on and on and on. It was a very nice, interesting set of things to read. But he had a question for me right at the bottom. It says, what film and TV series left you genuinely shocked by the ending, like Planet of the Apes? The TV series can be any particular episode. My two are Planet of the Apes and Soylent Green and the end of Blake 7. All outstanding choices, I have to say. That every single one of those are in my top 10. Do excuse me, product placement. And you nailed it on the head, really, because I've been a big fan of Planet of the Apes ever since I first saw it. As a child, you didn't realise there was going to be a shock ending. It really was. Starts off with three spacemen going through space. They crash down. They in a desert. It takes them days to go across the desert. They think they're going to die. They find plant life, which means that water is definitely on this planet. And while they're trying to find out whether there is other life on there, they see that there is a primitive life of a sort. And then suddenly there is also, with a magnificent, by the way, Jerry Goldsmith score, scream of drums and horns to signify the leaders of this planet, which were the apes. They're on horseback, they're firing guns, they're capturing humans and using them for scientific experiments and slaves. The humans considered to be pets of a sort. And I won't spoil the ending for you, even though that film came out in, 1968? But it had a spectacular shock ending where the character of the film that was played by Charlton Heston suddenly realised where he had landed. And it was done in such a way that there was nothing else to do. It was one of those films where there's no even end music. There is just the sound of the ocean and the words going up. And to me, that as a child, it was like, oh, the whole realization was this. So I've always looked out for films like that. There can only be so many with shock endings. Most films will tell a story, and they'll tell it with a beginning, a middle, and an end. So I started to fall in love with anthology type films, and it wasn't very much longer that I started to watch The Twilight Zone as a TV program, The Outer Limits as a TV program, and of course there have been films that Denny has mentioned, which is Planet of the Apes and Soylent Green. Definitely watch Soylent Green if anybody is out there doesn't know what that is. Look it up. Definitely worth a watch. And I showed it as my steelbook earlier last year. So I don't really have any ones that really come to mind. The Twilight Zone, the movie, was an interesting one because it was dogged with problems in the production. Rod Serling had obviously died many years previous, but it was interesting because they had 4 different directors telling 4 different stories, and it was joined together by how the film opened, and then it returned to that opening to end, if you see what I mean. So there was this, the best way to do it is really explain it. A hitchhiker is picked up on the road after something has happened to his car. The driver that picks him up starts to have a conversation with him, and during these conversations they talk about some things that they'd heard about. That's the 4 stories, and at the end there is a shock ending. It was probably the best way to actually do the Twilight Zone, to be quite honest. By the way, another fantastic Jerry Goldsmith score, mentioning his name an awful lot this episode. And the Twilight Zone was something that I'd started to watch, and therefore I couldn't wait to see the film. It is an 80s type film. There's nothing in it that if you think 80s films there's nothing superfluous. It's nothing super technical in it. There's no special effects. It's all of the 80s. And to be quite honest, an absolutely brilliant film, and that one has sort of like a shock ending. We've talked about The Sixth Sense before. That didn't really excite me. It was one of those ones that the shock ending was brilliant, really, really well told, but at the end of the day, when I've gone back to see that film, and I've only watched it a couple of times, I know the ending. So basically watching the film is a bit of a chore. And that's different to Planet of the Apes, because Planet of the Apes is never a chore for me to watch. So I'm hoping sort of like that answers your question. When it comes to TV, we'll talk about some Twilight Zone episodes then. So there are some famous ones. I mentioned last week about Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which basically just tells the story of a man who's very scared to fly. He gets on the plane, he tries to calm down, but he notices that there's something, some creature that's out on the wing trying to destroy the engines on the wing. He tries to tell the people on the plane. They think he's mad because every time he looks out the window and they look out the window, there's no creature there. But every time he then looks out the window, there's this creature. It doesn't really have a shock ending. But there is a conversation at the end while he's being carted off to hospital about the state of his mind. Then there are the really well-known ones called. There's one called To Serve Man. Serve Man is very, very famous because it talks about aliens visiting us and wanting to be our friends, and we're very, very skeptical. They say that they can give us devices and knowledge that will cure all illnesses, the cure to cancer, the cure to everything. They offer us the ability to be able to go to their planet and learn things. So starts a mass exodus of people wanting to leave and go to the planet. But while all this is going on, they give them a book, but of course it's in an alien language, and it takes months and months and months for this book to be translated. What then tends to happen is, just towards the end, and one of the main characters that we've been following through this whole episode he starts to get onto the spaceship himself so that he can learn all new science things. They actually managed to translate the book, and To Serve Man was not, this is the spoiler, so shut off now for the next 30 seconds, wasn't actually as in to help you. To Serve Man was a cookbook. So all these people that were going off thinking that they were going to be in a happy place were actually going to be food. Absolutely fantastic episode. You can all now come back. And the only other one, which I'll keep very short, is Time Enough at Last, with the lovely actor Burgess Meredith, where a very weak and whimsical man, definitely under the cosh with his wife, and works at a bank, tries to find time for himself to read. He's never got any time for himself. He tries to read everything. He starts reading bottles on the kitchen table. You know, even instructions on boxes for stationery. Then one day he was down at in the vault, and suddenly a big explosion occurs. As the rubble goes away and the door didn't slam shut on him, he managed to get out, and he finds that a nuclear bomb has gone off and wiped the whole of the planet. There is nobody alive. He goes home. He goes to famous buildings all around the city. Can't find anybody, and he comes to the realization that he has all the time in the world now to read books. So he finds the local library and starts pillaring books as high as he is, of books that he can now read. He's going down the stairs, counting them all up. And at one scene, he sort of bends forwards, and he's a glasses wearer, and the glasses fall off of his face and land on the concrete steps, and they're all cracked, smashed, and he doesn't have any spares. And it ends with him so distraught because he had time enough at last, he thought. And the story is nobody has got that much time. Fantastic stories, and this is what that made me want to. Well, I always wanted to meet Rod Serling, and of course that was never going to happen. He died while I was a child, to be quite honest. But what a fantastic writer, and all of those surprise endings are in the majority of those Twilight Zone episodes, and I always go back to them. Thank you so much for letting me reminisce a little bit there, Denny. So, you know, thank you so much, and I'm sorry, but that sort of like took me off track a little bit, reminiscing. I'll try and speed up. Colin, well, we all know Colin. Colin's absolutely brilliant. He's got his own channel, rides bikes. He's on the trains for us. So he's been explaining to him that he's had a very, very busy Christmas and New Year. He's looking forward to going, you know, having his regime come back. But he's asked a question. He says, is there any upcoming tech that you have your eyes on for purchases when it's released? Or is there anything existing now that you feel it's the right time to finally get? And he's thinking gadgets. Well, it's sort of similar to Jambon. We all know that Mainmeister and I and a few others would love a Mister. I've got my eyes on one. I got an update on my email to state that it was going to be the second week of January. It's now looking to be more like the end of January, the first week of February, before stock comes in that allows me to have one at a sensible price. And this is from the company that makes it, by the way, itself. So I take it it's legit. I put down my name for interest. They've kept me well apprised. I look at it like this: as long as I get one, I'm not that bothered. I'd like to have one now, but to be quite honest, for reasons that I'll probably explain towards the end, I'm happy that it might not happen this month, if you see what I mean, and I'll explain that in a little bit. When it comes to gadgets and stuff, I can give you some things that I've been doing just recently, because I used to work in, you know, with networks and all sorts of stuff. Just see if I can go back. There we go. It's all to do with low light, by the way. I used to see things that always intrigued me, because our offices was very, very spick and span, and I always wondered how we hide the wires and all of that sort of stuff. So over Christmas, when we wanted the Christmas decorations up for my mother, she doesn't like to leave marks behind, and she likes garlands and things that go along the skirting boards. So I found this sort of like thing. Then this is what we used to use for networking. I don't know if I can get that in shot, but basically it's a cable tie that you basically attach to the wall, and then you slot the cable tie through it. So you stick this to the wall and you slide it through the two parts like that, and then you ring it around and then draw it tight, and that will then grip anything to the wall. It's not really a gadget, it's more a help. You can see it's got the thread, the cable tie itself will go through top to bottom, or left to right, horizontal. So, and it's even got holes for panel pins if the glue on the back of here doesn't grip it solidly enough to your work surface. Now, I've tended to find the glue on these isn't bad at all, but it is weight related. And this is great because it doesn't take away or leave marks, if you see what I mean, because they use 3M glue, the company 3M. So if that helps you, brilliant. I started to use those from work in the garden for when we have to tie the tall rose bushes that grow up onto the fence. They're so nice to just tap these into the fence and then use cable ties to keep it with a little bit of a gap, so it doesn't strangle the plant, but also keep it flush with the fence and sort of trail everything. So I don't know. Hopefully that's a good answer for you, Colin, and Happy New Year to you. Then we've got Milfy. Oh, good old Milfy. Now, I was worried a little bit about Milfy towards the end of last year because he had something happen that all of us would dread, things that happen in our lives and our family, and he needed to go away, and hopefully I think things are starting to return to normal for Milfy. So he's been leaving me a couple of questions the last couple of weeks, so it sounds very much like he's on the up, so that's brilliant. So question, remember he's quite verbose. Do you think that future generations not of this world yet will look back on their modern electronic stuff, such as computers, consoles, games, music written for games, certain pieces of hardware, films, vehicles, and anything else that you can think of, with the same sort of nostalgia as we do now, with 64 Spectrums, Amigas, record players, old films, old cars, etc., etc.? Or will there be so much stuff in the future, say in 100 years from now, as long as we haven't blown ourselves up, yeah, that's true, that each day living, a futuristic person will get so used to uncovering yet another new discovery from the past, or be blown away by their own superior technology as it's invented within their life, that every new discovery, old or new, will meld into all the rest until the magical sense of new creation is lost and it's just taken for granted. What a well-rounded question, my God. And first of all, I have to look at this and go, there will be a time where we are overpopulated and overcrowded, and everybody will want to live somewhere, and we're going to be 3 or 4 or 5 to a house that aren't part of our family, and things will therefore be very difficult in regards to travel and watching and keeping things. I think that's pretty much why we've tried to micro everything down. So here we are with our archaeologists at the moment that find new dinosaur bones, fossils, and then we've got modern historians that find books and that tell us how life was back in the past, and then we've got our own history look back when we look at ourselves and we look at the equipment that we've had, and we try to relive those times by having that equipment around us, going back to it, playing those games, listening to that music. The nostalgia will never go away. I think our brains and minds can only go back so far, and I suppose the further we go back, the less our technology is, and so it's very difficult, therefore, to keep a record of something. So we only know snippets, and we've recorded what we can of it and kept it safe and preserved. But what I'm trying to get at here is that technology has helped us find this stuff. You know, we've found now the skeletal remains of kings that we thought were buried in churches that were actually buried in battlefields, or as I say it, underneath car parks near battles and all sorts of stuff. So there'll always be the nostalgia part. But the interesting part of your question for me is the last part, which says, will we want to, being as new technology will be coming along that will keep our minds interested in stuff that's coming, you know, that's coming out, or aid us getting that stuff that's in the past and re-recording it in another way so that we can get rid of the original and still be able to play, you know, or see the original in a different way, you know, like a hologram or something like that. Do we necessarily need to have the physical item if we can have a 3D representation of it in a hologram? Is probably one of the perfect examples. And from that point of view, the future to me is unknown. But I would certainly say that with the world, with us being hoarders naturally, I think a little bit, some of us more than others, and overcrowding, and you know, even getting somewhere is now becoming very, very difficult. That what we do with this, on what we find underground, that reminds us of this is how we used to live, will probably take a back burner. And that's a sad thing, because, like I say, who wants to see Stonehenge go? Who wants to see the role, you know, any of the stones, certainly in foreign countries, some of those wonders of the pyramids and so forth. I've never visited the pyramids, so, you know, I'd find it very bad that we're not able to preserve or keep these and the trinkets that were inside them. So hopefully that's answered your question, Milfy. I certainly answered the first, but nostalgia will never go away. And when it comes to how we discover it and what we do with it, yeah. And could it stunt us in moving forward with technology? I don't think it's happened so far, and that's why I think that I didn't really go into that aspect of it, because we continue to move forward. But if you micromanage things to a level like I've done before with computers, where I've said backward compatibility, why, and why things sell in higher numbers because it's got backward compatibility. At some point, we have to let the past go and move forward with a new reference design. That will hinder us, but I'm tending to find that we are relaxing that a little bit, and it's good to see, to be quite honest. So, thanks for that, Milfy, and I do apologise, talking quite a bit. We move to Rocket Bunny. Wish me well. I didn't play Valheim as much as I'd like to. My eyes are still blurring up. But he thought the reflection idea of last week was great. And he wanted to keep his question this time to just Blake 7. So hopefully I'm not going to alienate too many people. But Blake 7 is something that Rocket and I talk an awful lot about. And you can see Denny also has that as one of his favourite programmes. So, he says, speaking of Blake 7, any good thoughts and memories watching the show originally? What are your favourite episodes? Mine are Season 1, Episode 1, Spacefall, Season 1, Episode 7, Mission to Destiny, Season 2, Episode 3, Shadow, Season 2, Episode 11, Gambit, Season 3, Episode 6, City at the Edge of the World, Season 3, Episode 8, Rumours of Death, Season 3, Episode 13, Terminal, and of course Season 4, episode 13, Blake, for which he says, how to make an 11-year-old kid very angry at the time, was that episode. Right, after Adric died in Earthshock in Doctor Who. Yeah, so what he was saying there was he was watching Doctor Who and he saw a very, very well-known story called Earthshock with the Cybermen, and we saw a companion die. Well, not see it die, but we know that that character died. And it was, I think, at the first time in Doctor Who history where they didn't play any music and it was very silent and the credits just rolled up. And what he was talking about with Blake, the story Blake, was that it was there was a lead-up story that led to the very, very final episode of Blake 7, for which it's very well known what happened, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. Yes, it's very interesting because he's asking me as a child which stories sort of like took me. And to be quite honest, Blake 7 gripped me from the beginning, but it was a slow burn. You know, it started off very much with a guy who really couldn't remember anything in it. We slowly learned that, you know, he was part of a resistance. But I do remember right at the very beginning, what was it called? I think it was called Cygnus Alpha. Not quite sure. Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah, I do remember it was called Cygnus Alpha. So they're on the run, they're picking up people, they've now got the crux of the crew all together. They come across a planet that has a religious order, and I'll never forget it, because the reason I'm not forgetting it is because it had Brian Blessed and Pamela Salem in it. Apparently they were made to think that they couldn't leave the planet because of a disease that was on the planet. So of course you've got the normal, how do we get off the planet? These religious, you know, they're mind-bending idiots that basically if we stay around we'll never get to leave. But it also introduced the computer on the Liberator called Zen, and that was the thing that, and I think it was this particular episode that gripped me, that made me go, yeah, this is great. Pamela Salem, by the way, was in Into the Labyrinth, which I talked about not long ago. And it was only a couple of episodes later that I saw the episode that visually I loved, which was The Web. And I'll never forget, as a child, remembering a Doctor Who episode where you saw the TARDIS being encapsulated in a sort of like cocoon, a web-like thing in space. And they didn't know how to get this thing off. And this was the same thing. The Liberator is always mostly on the run. And it flew into an area of space where there seemed to be web-like tendrils across the whole of space. And the more they flew into it, the more it would grip to the ship. And suddenly, all of their intakes and engines were full of web type stuff that they had to try and work out how to get this web type material off. And they came across a planet and it was all again telepathy type thing. That brings to mind. But Blake 7 to me was always a character driven story. And so I always used to like the stories where Avon would be talking to, I don't know, Serverland or something like that. But I'll tell you one that really, really does stick to the mind. I've got to try and remember this. You'll have to think. I think it's easy for me to think of because it's season 3, end of season episode, where basically the ship is flown through again an area of space that would seem not too dangerous to fly through, but it ended up having some type of acid in the space, and this acid was burning through the ship. It was the Liberator's hull at the end, And basically, at the end of that episode, the Liberator blows up. Q having to wait 9 months before you'll be able to get to season 4. So you can imagine, as a young lad, just like Rocket was saying, those stories stick in your mind because it's a shock ending, and there's nothing that you can do about it until another season occurs. It's the same with Star Trek The Next Generation. I always found Star Trek The Next Generation really took off at the end of season 3, where Picard was taken over by the Borg and he became Locutus. And to be quite honest, it's the last comment that he makes. You know, all of your knowledge and all of your tactics are now with us, the Borg. Resistance is futile, you know. And he mentions that his second in command, number 1, which is like a real deadpan type shock thing, which means, oh my god, they really do know every tactic. And all you heard was number 1, who was Riker, say fire, you know, because they got a new weapon. And there's a stalemate. You don't know now what's going to happen until the next season. Oh, yeah, that comes to mind. I'm going to leave it there because I could go on and on and on about episodes. And to be quite honest, I'd like people to go out and actually see it. Denny mentioned that he thought that it might be on Blu-ray this year. I haven't seen an article about that yet, but I'm hoping it happens. And then we get to Wee Bob Art. Wee Bob Art, brilliant, fantastic. Happy New Year to you as well. He wanted to know, question for next time. If you are doing questions, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'll always do questions. He wasn't sure whether I've done my earliest memory of gaming, but do I have an earliest memory of gaming with another person, or an early experience playing games with others? And I've actually mentioned it before, Bob, and I'm not surprised that you wouldn't have found it, because it would have been buried in amongst my earliest memories of growing up as a kid in my sort of like gaming histories, and in discussions with Mainmeister, in the fact that although I had Pong and I had a sister who did not like electronics one bit, it was the friends in the street that would come round to play Pong with me. My dad wasn't interested in moving a paddle and a bat up and down. And so I befriended some of the lads in the street. One of them was Stuart, and another one was called John. Yeah. I don't know where they are now, of course. But Stuart's dad worked for, I think, K-Tel or RCA Records. He drove around in an Alfa Romeo. You know, he was a definite salesman. And he would get equipment and records and stuff before they were in the shops. And he was one of the first people in our street that had an Atari VCS system. And as soon as I saw that Atari VCS, I wanted it. And being out of a poorish family, it took a year before I could get it. So he had it literally probably the day that it came out in this country, and it was about a year later, so 1978, 79, before I got my Atari VCS. By this point, he'd got 50 or so cartridges, and I only had my one that came with it, Combat, I think it was. But he would let me borrow the odd cartridge for me to play, and that's playing singularly by myself. But until that point, I was going around his house and we were playing Combat and 2-player games, you know. And it's probably, other than playing board games where you're with another person, you have to have that person physically around you to play, that was my experience of 2-player gaming in an arcade-ish type format, because I was still too young really to play the arcade machines that you put coins in. But I could if I stood on a chair you know, or I was with my family around me. But again, those would have been singular experiences. They were never with my friends around me. I was always doing something with the family. And I've told many stories already about me looking after my nan and me going off in the lunch period, while she was playing bingo, Zetas it was, and going to the cafe and playing on those and going to toy shops and all that sort of stuff. So I hope that answers that. And that finishes the questions. Wow. Right. Got to move forward really, really fast with this if I'm going to get to my topic. Okay. So what have I watched this week? Well, just a couple of examples. So on YouTube, I watched a person called Image Game. He did a games you must play, platform or RTS or open world or RPG this year. So he's done a sort of like this is what's happening this year. These are the categories. These are the ones we're excited about, etc., etc. That was obviously something I was going to watch on YouTube, because 2023 is a new year and everybody is now talking about what we're going to expect. Worth a buy did a retrospective of the best and worst of 2022. That was quite interesting. Movie Collector continued to do his reviews of films. He picked up one called The Driver. And The Driver is quite a known film, but not one that you'd expect to see in 4K. When you consider that there are films like The Abyss that are just about round the corner being done in 4K. The Driver is a 1970s film, not particularly well known. It's got a couple of iconic scenes in it that has just come out on 4K, and he was sort of like talking about how good whether the good picture was good, whether the sound was good, and the reasoning behind why this film was coming out, which I thought was very good. And then there's another guy called Nuzzy. Now he did something because of my sort of like a Vampire Survivors type games. He's done a cheap versus expensive retrospective of action roguelike games. So he showed Vampire Survivors, which is like a $4.99 game. Then he showed that against Army of Ruins, which is a game I've just bought, which is £2 or £3. And then he showed one of the ones that are at the top, you know, the £9 and £10 ones, like the Binding of Isaac, and said, which ones would you are worth buying? Are the ones that are so highly priced not worth buying anymore? Because, to be quite honest, the up and coming cheap ones are the ones to buy. So that was interesting. And then that's pretty much what I watched on YouTube. But what I watched of you guys, sort of like on the lowdown a little bit because of my eyesight. So you have to apologise that I'm not watching and commenting as much at the moment, because I am finding it difficult to stay focused on the screen. So 20th Century Gaming did a couple of live streams over the Christmas and New Year, and he did a long play of a game on the 64 called Terrestrial, which anybody who is in the know will know that it's sort of like a Beachhead 2 Raid over Moscow stitched together of sequences where you know it's got all of those elements that are in those games melded into one, and it's absolutely fantastic from what I can see. Definitely what I'm thinking about picking up. And then there is Steve's Retro Gaming, Ponder, and Robert all this week doing a playthrough of Donut Dodo. Now, is it Donut Dodo? Yeah, Dodo. So this is a game that Ponder recommended to me a month or so back. I did it in a live stream, and it's really, really quite good. It's a modern take of how arcades used to be in the 80s. You know, if the words Mr. Do come to mind, or Popeye come to mind, you'd recognise that you've got the lovely, flashy, gorgeous colours, the lovely sounds, everything, in a platformy type game where you have to pick up the donuts and then get to the huge donut at the end of the level with all of the antagonists chasing after you. Absolutely fantastic. All three of them did their own take of it. Some of them tried to do a high score, I think, type thing, and they thoroughly entertained me. And what I really liked about it was the cross talking about each of their channels, trying to promote each of their channels, which was great. I noticed I didn't get mentioned, but it was really nice to see. So that was brilliant. Steve also did, at the end, tried to play some NES games. And it was fun to watch because he got to one called Gyrus. And I thought to myself, Gyrus is one of those ones that Mainmeister and myself have sometimes criticised Nintendo for not doing a true arcade conversion, but adding their own little elements to it. And Gyrus is the exception to the rule, from my perspective, that I told Mainmeister, because although it's not truly Gyrus, there are bosses and things like this that aren't in the actual arcade game. Those extra bits really did actually add to the game, so that was definitely worth a watch. Then you've got LFC. He did a sort of a history lesson by using Google Maps. So this quite intrigued me. I've seen lots and lots of videos by people where they put a dash cam in and gone around their hometown and talk about their hometown, what streets they're going down and all of that sort of stuff. And I've always thought it was dangerous to do, because all you need to know now is their age and their name, and basically you can probably, you know, hack into Facebook or anything by giving, because you've given too much away. But this was really well done. He used Google Maps and showed some really lovely areas of near where he lives, not actually where he lives, which is, I have to make that point out. And it was quite interesting. The village was lovely. It had all of those Tudor beams and that you get with cottages and all that sort of stuff. Really worth a watch. And then of course Mainmeister did a couple of videos this week. His output is now being stretched a little bit more, and he did a retrospective of Pitfall and a 10-minute kerfuffle of Super Pipeline. Absolutely fantastic videos, can't fault them. I only mentioned to Mainmeister that the thing about Pitfall for me was not only its technical ability, but it also introduced us to a character, and that was Pitfall Harry. And what I didn't know was that Pitfall Harry has been in no end of games. He's not just been in the Pitfall games. I think when I was looking at it myself, they listed 10 games, and I was taken aback by that. Definitely watch those two videos. So well made, but it's just listening to Alan while he's playing it that brings back certain memories that makes you then go, oh yeah, I forgot. Definitely need that in our videos. Then Wee Bob Art. I've started to watch a little bit more of his stuff, even though I'm not quite ready to start drawing yet. But he did an episode where he uses a piece of software called Rebella 6. And he did a video that I think everybody should do. If you're ever going to do a tutorial of something, people never know where to start. And he did how to set up this program in 24 minutes. And he actually does it in 24 minutes. He sets up his brushes, his swashes, where he's going to save things, everything. Goes through from the beginning to the end. Absolutely just what you need to help you out for anybody that's getting started. Now, I tried to look for these types of videos when I was learning Premiere Pro, and they're all in little snippets, and they never in one program, and whenever they're starting at the beginning, they're always saying, look, you know this, I'm going to skip ahead to this. There's always something that ruins the whole experience for you, because all I want to know is, how do you set it up? What's the first thing I need to do? Etc, etc. Yeah, and very, very few out there, all in 5-minute nugget snippets and stuff. Terrible. And then lastly, just because I missed it, it was down the rabbit hole. He did a video of him eating a Christmas dinner, but it was the first time him eating goose. And it came about because of Scrooge, obviously, with Scrooge saying, get me a goose boy. Obviously, it's a little bit late telling you to go and watch this video now, being it's sort of a Christmassy sort of thing. But that was, he He can make reading the telephone book seem interesting, and that's the best sort of acknowledgement I can give for why you should watch Down the Rabbit Hole's videos. Okay, and then we get to me. Okay, so I did the Hogmanay with Mainmeister. So on New Year's Eve, I was there for about 4 hours, talking rubbish, playing kick-off games, all sorts of stuff. And it was very, very fun. I really, really enjoyed myself. I think what happens, though, is that as more people kept coming in to chat, which is always lovely for that to happen, I had difficulty being able to get a word in edgewise. If two people suddenly start bouncing off of each other, talking quite technical, then basically I'd like to introduce my element into it, but there's no pause for gap. Then I basically am in the background. So I wasn't bored. Somebody mentioned I look that way, and I don't take offence by that. It's that wasn't what was happening. What you tend to find is that I can't see the comments while I'm looking at the StreamYard settings. So I've got a computer just here, and I've got YouTube open with the sound off, and I can see the comments going by in real time. And all that was happening is I thought it would be good for me to help the guys out by hopefully being able to introduce a question that might move it off the subject, or at least I can give my own answer in a texty way to everybody that was watching, because we had 30 or 40 people watching this. And like I say, if one topic goes on for 10 or 15 minutes, it can alienate. So all I was doing, was not being bored at all. I was just trying to help. Thoroughly enjoyed myself. I played kick-off with Alan. He stuffed me 2-0, Scotland versus England, with an online version of kick-off. Then, of course, I've done my blog. And this week I've been playing a game that takes me back to both my 8 and 16-bit experience, which was a game called Defend Star. I'm not going to go into too much depth because we haven't really got an awful lot of time, but basically Defend Star is Defender, Data Storm and Drop Zone in one on your PC in just over 100 meg in space on your hard drive, so next to nothing when you consider the terabytes that we've got. And it's just so slick and fun to play. You've got to play that game, and it was Denny that introduced it to me, so thank you very much, Denny. Other than that, when I can play games, I've been playing Army of Ruin, Valheim, Craft the World, and Tetris. And you might go, why Tetris? And the reason for it is that I haven't got a VR version of Tetris, and something came up on the Steam sale, and it was the latest version of Tetris that is not only in 2D but in 3D, and it looked very much like a game called Res. Lots and lots of spatial particle effects going on in the background while you're trying to do your Tetris game. It intrigued me enough for me to go, right, so if I buy this on Steam, I've also got it on VR, so it's a no-brainer. It's 75% off. I'll go and buy that game, and I've got it on VR. And I must admit, I've loaded it once, played it, and loved it. I'd like to go back to it, but of course, it's all down to my eyes. And then what have I watched on TV? Now, what I can recommend is The Rig, which has just come out on Prime Video, on the Prime streaming channel. Basically, I didn't know what to expect. It came up as an advert about 4 days ago on terrestrial TV, heavily advertising this thing called The Rig, and obviously I knew therefore that it was about the North Sea rigs, where we drilled for oil off the coast of Scotland. So I didn't want to know any more about it other than that, and I sat down to watch it, and there are 6 or 8 episodes. I think it's 6. I've seen it all the way through, and to tell you, if I was to put it into one sentence, what it is the thing on an oil rig. Now, if anybody knows anything about me and the film The Thing, you'll know I'm heavily into that film, The Thing. So, but it's got a Scottish part to it. So imagine this. It starts off with a crack in the earth appearing underneath where this rig is, okay? And it starts off a chain of events on this rig, okay, where they're drilling for oil. Everybody's trying to get off the rig, but they can't, and they don't know when they're going to be able to get off because of the weather. It started a tsunami, this crack in the earth, okay? Cue this Scottish guy that's on the rig. Well, a lot of them are Scottish, to be quite honest. And he tells of a story where the north of Scotland was totally different about 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, where there was a tale that a crack appeared in the earth and it caused a tsunami that basically has shaped and mapped what Scotland looks like now on its coastline. So imagine Scotland being the size of what England is in the middle part, on top of what we know of Scotland, which is just the top part of the United Kingdom. And that everything happened where the water came in to fill in that hole. It caused a tsunami, and basically we've now got what we've got of Scotland. Now, if that's a fable, I don't know, but he gave the fable a name and everything, and I was going, oh, that's interesting. And then we learn that there is a life growing at a certain level where they're drilling, and it's trying to attack back. So it's very much like an old Doctor Who episode, like the Silurians, but it's The Thing, and they take over some of the crew on this rig and all sorts of stuff. Hopefully that's intrigued you to watch it, because it's really quite good. It is very wordy, it is very drama-y. The special effects are minimum, but it's good, and you can see there's been a lot of effort made into it. So definitely my recommendation for this week is The Rig. And then we're going to get to a topic. Right. Done a little bit of research on this, and this has happened because I couldn't sleep one night and I was watching Legend on a satellite channel, which is basically just a normal Freeview channel, and RoboCop was on. And RoboCop I'd forgotten all about as a TV series, and it was from 1994. But just before RoboCop was on, and I'd missed 5 minutes from the start, a TV program came on called Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads. Now, this might mean nothing to you, it might mean something to you, but that is one of the comedies that I remember but know little about, if you see what I mean. So it perked my interest of going, oh yeah, I watched this. Right, I'm gonna watch Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads. So I did some background on it. So this didn't start off as a program called Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads. It started off as a program called The Likely Lads. It was 20 episodes long. It ran from 1964 to 1966. And there are very, very few repeats of it, because of the 20 episodes, only 10 episodes survive. So 10 of the episodes were junked as part of the BBC's junking program that got rid of all of those Doctor Who episodes that all Doctor Who fans wish to just kill the BBC for doing. Okay? It was written by two people that might mean something to a few of my friends, Dick Clement and Ian Leigh Frenace. Now, if that doesn't ring bells to you, I'm just going to prod your mind a little bit, because they wrote Porridge, Lovejoy, Alvida's Aim Pet, and wrote the film The Commitments, amongst dozens of other shows. And I stress the Alvida's Aim Pet and Porridge part, because those are definitely comedy gold and are part of many of my friends' childhood's memories. I mean, if you talk about Porridge, everybody talks about how class that was and how Ronnie Barker was so good. And of course, they obviously did the follow-up Going Straight. And of course, Alvida's Aim Pet was just quintessentially something about that show that happened in the 80s, where a motley crew of people from the northeast, well, from around the country really, Birmingham as well, went to Germany to help build houses because there was no work in Britain. So it was a piece of writing from its time. But we're talking about a show called The Likely Lads. Now, when the show ended in 1966, it wasn't redone until the 70s. And that's where I come in, because I remember seeing The Likely Lads as a colour production. Okay? So, let's talk a little bit about background with that. It's basically two guys, right? They're played by James Bolam, who plays Terry, and Rodney Bewes, who plays Bob. Now, James Bolam, who plays Terry, he's the cynical everyman. He's the working class person that we all know of. And then there's Rodney Bewes. He's Bob. Now, he's the person who always wants to try and better himself. He's the one who wants to move into, if there was a class system, he'd want to move into the middle class. He wants to better himself. And these two guys in the 60s worked for Ellison's Electrical in a factory. And really, it was their two takes on trying to cope with the 60s, the swinging 60s, while being on the breadline. So they never had much money. And it was all based in around the northeast, Newcastle, Whitley Bay, all of that sort of stuff. So they lived in the northeast. Their hobbies were beer, football, and girls. And they were trying to enjoy the 60s. And what actually, basically it was set in a studio, so you only ever saw studio. There was no location filming. But in the very last episode, Bob, who's always trying to better himself, decided he wanted to join the army and enlist for 3 years. And he went for the medical. Now, the everyman, Terry, didn't want to do that, but knew that his friend was going to go off by himself. Decided that he would do the same thing but not tell Bob. And he went for the medical, passed the medical, and got his papers to actually say that he was now enlisted into the army. While that was going on, Bob went for the medical, failed the medical because he had flat feet, and basically didn't go off to be in the army, splitting the two up. And one of them went off into the army, the other one stayed behind in the northeast. That ended The Likely Lads. And that was the comedy joke of that particular time for The Likely Lads. It was then recreated as Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads. And in Whatever Happened to the Likely Lads, it was several years on, so we're 1973-74. It lasted 2 seasons and went for 26 episodes, of which all of them are available. And they also did a Christmas special. It's now in colour. They used location shooting, so this time you did get to see some of the northeast. But it changed its emphasis a little bit, okay? It started totally as being about nostalgia, and we've talked about nostalgia an awful lot. And it made me think while I was watching it, is nostalgia programmed into us? Because if you quintessentially watch any TV program, there is always going to be somebody in there reminiscing about the past or how we did things. Okay, I remember being at school. There used to be a program that we'd watch called How We Used to Live, and it's all about the past and how we live. It's nostalgia, and that was the underlying theme through both of the series, but definitely in the second series. And it's even reflected in the main theme, which has the words, "Oh, what happened to you? Whatever happened to me? What became of the people we used to be?" That's the main theme for the show. So it may not sound very exciting, but those two writers just write comedy gold. And if that's perked your interest, I definitely recommend you go and look for those episodes to watch. They are available on DVD. They are being shown as repeats around Freeview. And there's just something to add about this in the end, which was a bit sad. James Bolam, I believe, is still around, but Rodney Bewes died in 2017. But what we found out on why the show is not repeated very often is that there's a vicious rumour, and nobody knows whether any of this is really true. And James Bolam won't talk about it. Apparently, the two people that are supposed to be best friends in the show fell out after the 1976 film of the show. Okay, it was something involving the press and something that was quite close to James Bolam that Rodney Bewes accidentally spilled out in an interview. I think it was on the Parkinson show. They didn't talk to each other after that point. Now, Bewes only mentioned there was a feud in 2005 while he was promoting his autobiography. James Bolam says there was no feud, but Bewes says there was. And you have to look at the two things here, where Bewes' career did not take off. Bolam's did. He went on into be Only When I Laugh, New Tricks, all sorts of stuff. And for all intents and purposes, Rodney Bewes died very much a pauper compared to James Bolam. And if the rumour is true that James Bolam had enough influence to not have repeats, it would have meant that neither of them got repeat money for the show being repeated, and therefore that wouldn't hurt James Bolam, who keeps getting more work, but would affect Rodney Bewes if his career wasn't taking off. In fact, the only thing that I can think of that Rodney Bewes was in, he was in an episode of Doctor Who during the Peter Davison era in a Dalek episode. I think it was Resurrection of the Daleks. So Bewes died, and Bolam has constantly shied away talking about the show. Even now, he does not talk about the show. He took away any chance of any reunions. Anything after 1976, you'll see very little about this show. And he categorically denies it to this day. It's such a sad story at the end, because you hear about this, don't you? Did Morecambe and Wise really like each other? Did Abbott and Costello really like each other? Did Laurel and Hardy really like each other? It seems to crop up over and over and over again. And it's a sad thing to end on, but that's the topic. Please, if you think that Whatever Happened to the Lightly Lads sounds like a good show for you to watch, and I do recommend it, please do. Great show. And I'm just going to end on what's arrived this week. Not very much, because it's between Christmas and New Year. These are the stuff that I think was held up in the post, because I haven't ordered anything for a while. Rollerball finally turned up from Germany, which is James Caan and the futuristic game Rollerball. It's the 15th anniversary of Cloverfield, and the 4K release of Cloverfield got released. It's not particularly one of my favourite films, but it's a steel book again. It's one that I think would probably look quite good in 4K because of the way it was filmed. And then these were in the sale, so I know that these were something I did order between Christmas and New Year. The Jack Nicholson, Michael Keaton Batman from 1989 in 4K in a deluxe packaging steelbook, and Batman Returns. I didn't see the other two films that were part of that four-part four parts quadrilogy, I suppose is the word. So Batman and Robin, I think, is one of them, and that I didn't see those, which means I'm two missing. But I've got those as Blu-ray, so I'm not really that bothered. Those two, the Tim Burton ones that injected Batman back into the modern culture, were the ones that I really wanted anyway. The Christopher Nolan ones I've shown you in the past, so you know I've got all of those. And that ends the blog. Okay. I have not done my community question. I've talked about the fact that I'm going to be shortening this. This is slightly shorter, but not by much. And I will bring out that community question this week. I'm hopefully going back to work this week. I'm waiting for the chair. The estimate for the chair is the 9th or 10th of January. So tomorrow or Tuesday. So I'm looking forward to going back to work. And I'm looking forward very much to the blog next week. And if you have enjoyed this video, I really hope you have. If I've missed anybody out, I apologise. There was a cut-off point quite early yesterday. So I will do a recap again at the end of next week, and from then on I will be having these cut-off points, because it's just impossible for me to keep track all the way up until me pressing record on a Sunday. And with that, salute, Happy New Year, and let's hope for a brilliant week for us all. Bye bye.